Welcome to the first, I guess you'd say, iteration of the War Cry podcast. I am your humble and gracious host, Yahola Tiger, aka the one man band. I sat back and thought, I said, Russell has a podcast, Chris has spooky stories from Indian country, and Tyler has Skoden Cinema and Pump Action podcast, which be in mind. Go follow those guys, like, subscribe, do what you do. Um, but I sat back and I said, how am I the only one without a podcast? And so I changed that. Like I said, guys, welcome. Um, this is episode 1. My goal is to get to episode where I start losing count and I just say, hey, welcome to Warcry Podcast. Um, we'll see how that goes. But, there's been a lot of things that's been happening over the last, I guess you'd say 2 months. Um, you add in, the unsolved mysteries of the reservation. I actually am a host of that too as well, but we did certain special events, different types of special events, and kind of just made the rounds in this part of Indian country, and it was a lot of fun. Um, and then obviously when spooky season kind of rolls around, you get into Indigenous month, is what a great month we're in. But you know, I kind of sat back to myself. I said, there's some things going on, and I guess you kind of say our climate that we're in. And I started looking and observing, and that's one thing that I'm very keen on is what I do is I observe people and I observe, you know, how they act and what they say. And this past week, here in Oklahoma, we just had our general, or I guess our Oklahoma election for governor and state superintendent, and to me, watching everybody kind of just, you know, basically, divide each other from, each other. I kind of glad I didn't involve myself in that mayhem. And there's been a few times on Facebook and Twitter, and I'm just like, man, it's embarrassing to do that, in my opinion. You know, one thing that nobody really talks about is that this past election was actually 2 Republicans for governor. And I don't know if anybody caught that. I never saw anyone say anything about that. And I followed people from both spectrums. People, that are pro one side, pro another side. I never saw one person say, hey, by the way, both these candidates are actually Republican, and one is a dummy Republican, like faking as a Democrat. And so that kind of got me thinking, like, you know, things are never as they truly are. They're never really what they say, what things are. And it got me really thinking, like, what else? What else? And so this podcast is about, how things are never truly what they are. And that goes into a whole lot of different topics. But, I bring up the political side of, our government and the politicians and people like that. But in our daily lives, things are never what they seem. Example, you know, it could be in a relationship where you're dating that person for an extended period of time and you hit that trigger and they're not who you thought they were. It could be one of those things that go bump in the night. For another example is a ghost. We've spoken on the unsolved mysteries of the reservation. Um, podcast, we've talked about how certain sometimes spirits, they mask themselves as a nice and kind entity to your children, and you make them mad, or you set that that entity or spirit doesn't really like what you're doing, it's going to flip on you, and you see who they really are, and things are never what they seem. So, like I said, this topic that we're talking about, you know, brings up something I heard um, when it comes to, I guess you could say, spirits. Um, I heard a story about a dog that showed up at someone's house. Um, this is out in kind of a big city. I'm not going to give any details or anything. I actually heard this from Josh Turner over at Paranormal Roundtable, um, and I thought it was pretty interesting. I want to kind of deep dive as I talk about this. But this lady had this dog show up at her uh, apartment, kind of on the lower level. She kind of had a back area, kind of just one of those condo type apartments when you have, when you're on the lower level, you kind of have a little bit of a yard. Well, not really a yard, but more of like a enclosed location. And one thing that I just found so interesting about this story is the way this dog got into this lady's life. Was It came up manged, didn't look right, it looked like it was in dire straits, basically. Well, not trying to hate on women, but and not really, this is what you guys do. You want to take care of things, that's what women, that's what you guys do. Well, she wanted to take care of this dog. She wanted to nurse this dog back to health. Dang, talking about some of these uncles over here. I don't know why that made me think of that. You're like, oh, let me go ahead and nurse you back to health, uncle. Anyways, but sorry, you know what they say. Nothing says I love you more than having a place to stay. Anyways, back to the story. So this woman, is nursing this dog back to health and wants to take care of it. And the husband comes home and he's like, "Nah, we're not keeping this dog." Well, the dog was kind of being mean to him, like growling at him and kind of really, you know, showing its teeth, and he thought that was the strangest thing ever. Sometimes animals do that. The person that protects them and rescues them, they give their life to that person. That's kind of animals. Some animals do. So the dog ends up staying, and she's, not really sure, you know, what's going to happen if her husband's going to want to keep a dog. Well, the dog ends up staying long term. And as the nights go and as the days move on, there's these weird things happening. For instance, one day they both came home and the milk that was in the fridge was on the counter, and there was basically Cheerios or some type of cereal all, kind of spread around the counter. It was a mess in there. And they thought that was weird. Like, how could the dog get in? But they were thinking maybe, they didn't shut the fridge all the way, and dog, somehow opened the thing up and, just made a mess of the fridge. But they thought it was weird that the milk was on the counter, basically still in the container, not a mess. There was other things where, like, she started having weird dreams of this kind of, dark complected guy, that would basically, get in their dreams and talk to her, and just basically a conversation, like in her dreams, like in, different type of place. And, every now and then the husband would, say, it's time for us to take this dog back away. And the dog would all of a sudden just turn into this savage, this mean animal that, otherwise, wouldn't be that way. Well, she ends up you know, really getting attached to this animal. And basically, the dog was getting in the way, uh, in between her husband, I mean, her and her husband. And the dog ended up, basically every time he came in the room, the dog would just act crazy. Well, then they started putting the dog out. They started putting the dog outside, and when they leave the dog, another weird thing I thought was when they leave that dog at home alone, somehow that dog would get outside and outside the gate and meet them outside their apartment. So somehow they locked everything in the house. The dog would somehow still get outside, still outside the fence, get outside the fence and meet them outside. And I always thought that was real weird, thinking maybe, she'd always blame her husband. How dare you? How dare you? We have this dog and we can't afford to leave him, let him get out there in the world again and get hurt and, really blaming the husband. Well, one night she had got up, kind of woke up from a dream and she's dreaming about this long haired, dark complected guy. And uh, the dog was sitting there kind of laying by this mirror. And when she kind of opened her eyes, she saw that same man in the reflection of that dog. She woke up so fast she had to rub her eyes, and she looked, and it was again, and it was the dog. It was the complexion of the dog. So she thought she was seeing things maybe from her dream. Well, one night another night, after that, the husband ends up seeing that same man as the complexion of the dog. Well, they started kind of getting weirded out by that, and they started asking around about somebody who could see things like that, and it's a different culture. And the lady got in there, and the dog she knew what it was, and all the lady told them was basically, you need to get rid of that dog, and you need to tell that dog to leave. And the lady thought that was so strange. The wife thought that was so strange. And so as things are getting worse. The husband is moving out. He's like, I'm done. I'm tired of you protecting this dog. And, when she finally kicked her husband out and he was living with someone else, it was almost as if it was draining her of her energy. It was draining the husband at first. He ended up having some bad luck and just not real, not real sure what he was doing. Kind of just losing his mind a little bit. But when he left, he started regaining his energy back. He started putting that weight back on. Like, he was losing crazy weight, losing hair. But when he left, all that stuff started coming back. And, he went to see his wife one day just to check on her because he ain't heard from her. And she was real kind of sick looking, frail. And he started thinking, like, this dog is draining this energy. Well, he eventually ended up helping her out. And I think he stayed over there one night. And that's when he seen this thing. It wasn't a dog. In Middle Eastern culture, they call it the jinn or the yin. And I apologize if that's a terrible pronunciation, but this thing was masquerading as a dog to gain power off this couple. And so I tell that story, and I like I said, I heard that from Josh Turner at Paranormal Roundtable because it hits me, especially with kind of what's been going on here in Oklahoma and just seeing things, and they're not exactly what they seem, and everything around us, we always have to make sure we're focused. And I think that's one thing that, with the pandemic, everybody kind of got lulled to sleep. Not having to worry about your bills, not having to worry about this, not having to worry about that because you're locked up or locked down, not locked up. Dang, had you, some of y'all, some of y'all's down here in Tulsa County now, but locked down, and it took your focus away, and it took your drive away, and you're wanting things and to make your life better. And I think, with what's been going on, I think this is a good time to kind of say that is things are never as they seem. And that's one thing I just happened to really kind of think about that over the last kind of month maybe. And but this podcast is going to, you guys will get a lot of, you guys will get some inside baseball of some of the stories that I've told, on Unsolved Mysteries of the Reservation, or live events. If you listen to live streams that we've had, or TikToks, because one thing that I try to do on Unsolved Mysteries Reservation is try to make it short, trying to get to the point of the story. With this podcast, you'll hear a lot of inside baseball on certain stories that have been told. Um, you're going to get a lot of stories like the one I just told you. Of just kind of interesting but weird and paranormal type of situations or entities or beings. Um, but so that's what this podcast is going to be about. And I appreciate you guys. If this is first time ever hearing me speak separately, or this is the millionth time you heard me speak, if you're a family member, um, and I appreciate you guys, listening to Unsolved Mysteries of the Reservation, Okie Podcast, Skoden Cinema, Pump Action Podcast, and Spooky Stories from Indian Country, because all those things are all important, to help us, guide ourselves, and help us, kind of get, kind of almost not like a fantasy world, but kind of get us, refocused on the things that need to be refocused on. And so I appreciate you guys listening to this first episode. And I'm going to plug a few things. Like I know I plugged the cruise podcast, but I would like to also plug my uncle John M. Tiger Artworks on Facebook. Um, he's got a lot of stuff going on. I know there's a couple art markets coming up in December. I think one's December 3rd, another one is December 10th. As I release these, I'll get more information. I haven't really dived into that, but I know that there are art markets going on. I think one's in the Glenpool area. I think another one's maybe South Tulsa. Um, but like I said, guys, I appreciate you listening to this first episode, and there'll be more to come. Mado and Wado.